Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today, we're going to talk about backing up to the fourth wall, or in other words, when you have to defend a show so far that you walk all the way up to the fourth wall, and then you turn around and you say, "Everyone stop. Wait, it's just a show." And what prompted this was actually I was in an argument on the internet with someone about The Legend of Korra. But there are some other things that prompted me to do this episode, and part of it was that I was talking about My Little Pony. I posted some posts about My Little Pony, and someone kept replying to those posts with MST3K mantra, "Nuff said." And MST3K, if you're not familiar, it's Mystery Science Theater 3000, and it was a show where this group of guys would watch these B movies, and they would make fun of them. This later went on to become riff tracks on the internet, and you can go to movie theaters now and watch these guys do like live riffs and things like that. It's a lot of fun. Like, it's a fun show. But the MST3K mantra is that you always have to remind yourself it's just a show and I should really just relax. It comes from their theme song. What it was is that you had like the premise of MST3K was that these guys were trapped on a satellite, or a guy was trapped on a satellite with a bunch of robots, and he watched the movies with the robots. And so they said, if you're wondering how he eats and breathes and other science facts, just remind yourself that it's just a show and I should really just relax for Mystery Science Theater 3000. So yes, the MST3K mantra is when you're watching your shows, just relax. Don't think about the logic or anything like that. And I feel like there's a time and a place for the mantra. It was a little like, I can't really take it away from a guy. If you can seriously watch a show and not think about anything that's on screen, then I feel like ignorance is bliss. And it's not always, like, more enjoyable to watch a show and nitpick everything about it. I mean, like, you know, you could never do that. Like, with science fiction, you might run into things that you would say, like, oh, that's totally implausible. But I was thinking about it, and storytelling is essentially the art of telling people convincing and exciting lies. Like, they know it's a lie, so it's not really, you know, like, we don't treat it like telling lies. Lies have a negative connotation, but essentially everything about storytelling is just telling an exciting and creative lie. And the thing about lies is people have to believe them, you know? And so what you do when you tell a lie, like if you were to tell a serious lie to somebody, a lot of times the best way to do it is you keep everything very grounded and convincing, and the only thing you alter is the truth, like the one thing you want to avoid. So like you tell a lie and you say like you know, you can't tell people huge lies. Like, you can't tell them the sky is green or grass isn't green. You can't tell them grass is blue all of a sudden. You can't really, like, convince people that things that they know and that they've established in their lives are false. Like, if they know something is false, then that's a crack in your lie and you're screwed up. A lot of times the way that you tell a lie best is you follow the rules. You tell everyone, like, yeah, grass is green and the sky is blue. And then you give your explanation for a thing that happened. And you make it seem like, well, you could say like, oh, like if you were reluctant to tell someone about something, then you give them an answer and you say like, oh, well, I was, you know, ashamed because of this. And you lie about what you were ashamed about. See, but this establishes like shame, you know, and so it's like, oh, that's why I didn't tell you. And then that kind of satisfies the lie, because then the person follows emotionally and logically and they say, oh, okay, all right, you were ashamed. That's why you didn't talk to me. When the truth is you're lying about something else. See, you have kind of a smart lie going on because you create a reason for you to hide information, but then you lie about what you were hiding. You know, see, so this is the way that storytelling kind of works. It's the same thing. Is you create sort of this emotionally convincing facade where, I mean, none of it is true, but you have to go along with what the audience is going to expect in a certain way. So, like, if you tell them, like, oh, my character feels this, my character does this for this reason, you get things like Freudian psychology, justifying characters doing things that are not really acceptable. And people go along with it because you tell them like, oh, well, they've got this crappy past, you know. They're a sad person, you know, this makes them sad, and that's why they do it. And people will kind of emotionally engage with that and say like, oh, okay, well, I'm sympathetic about the crappy past. And they kind of take that lie for what it is. Even though if you know your psychology really well, those Freudian excuses are just excuses. They don't really... Like there's no Freudian reason people have to be assholes. You know, you can go through a traumatizing experience and still go on to be a great, you know, uplifting kind of person. You know, that's the truth. That's the honest truth. But a lot of storytellers like to go with the lie, where they say like, well, he had a difficult past and therefore he's a terrible person. You know, the lie is convincing and people go with it. It's more interesting than the truth sometimes, depending on how you tell the story. So, yes, this is sort of the idea of storytelling. And there are times, though, when you get, like, if you're trying to do, like, real storytelling, if you're trying to convince your audience that your lie is true, then it's very important that you stay grounded and you tell them things that they know are true for the most part. And the only things you exaggerate are the things that you expect them to go along with emotionally. So if your story has magic, then you tell them like, oh yes, there was magic. And then with magic, you have to kind of establish a certain amount of ground ruling so that you don't get too crazy with it, and then that way they follow along and it works the way that they expect. And as soon as you confuse them with it, if you tell them it does something that they expected it couldn't do, then they'll start to question you, and you break the immersion, you back up to the fourth wall, and you're kind of like, well, I messed everything up. But what you can go all the way to are tall tales, which are tales where you start to tell the audience just flat, bald-faced lies, but they're so wild and crazy and over the top that they become funny, and people enjoy them because they're so nuts. You say like, oh yeah, I went out and I battled a tornado, I battled a twister, and they're like, well, how did you do it? You're like, well, I grabbed onto it with my teeth. And I just held on to it, and I shook it around, and I shook it around back the other way, and I unspiraled it. I unwrapped the tornado and shook it loose, and I saved the farm. And nobody's going to believe that lie is true. But people forgive it because it's so crazy and so off the wall. It sounds kind of funny. It's like, oh, Uncle Greg, he tells these crazy stories about, battling with twisters and things like that. And the fun of that, then, is that you just look people dead in the eye and you tell them this incredibly stupid lie that no one's going to believe, and everyone knows you're lying. But you're really enthusiastic about it, and they get attached to your enthusiasm. So it's kind of like one of those things like, what are you going to tell us this week, Uncle Greg? What are you going to tell us? So, well, did I ever tell you about the time that I lifted a buffalo? Like, I stole it. What by lifted, I mean I stole it. I stole it from the National Buffalo Bank and ran clear away to California, to the Mexican Buffalo Cartel, where I sold it into a circus in Mexico. And, you just tell this crazy story, and they want to kind of hear where you go next. And for those situations, again, it's not that you're not supposed to think about it. It's almost actually better if you do, because you say like, oh, how'd you find this Mexican cartel? And the excitement and the fun is to see how Uncle Greg justifies the lie, because he's going to lie to you again. But Uncle Greg will come up with some, this next just crazy idea for like, oh, well, of course, I met this Mexican cartel back during a heist in Florida when I stole from the Budgie plantation. And you just kind of make it up, but you just don't stop the lie and you just keep going. So this is the kind of tongue-in-cheek thing that I think MST3K, the MST3K mantra, is better suited for, where, when you can't heckle, when you can't stop and you say, Uncle Greg, no, wait, tell me how you did this. You just kind of go along and you listen. So Uncle Greg tells you he battled the twister, and you don't interrupt because he's trying to tell the story to everyone, and if everybody started heckling, he'd never finish the story. And so you just say like, okay, yeah, Uncle Greg battled the twister. Like, sure, fine, he just says this. And you kind of let it go. It's the MST3K mantra in a nutshell, and in that situation, it's the best way to have fun and enjoy the story. But going back again, though, to where we're trying to tell a serious lie, and you want to convince everyone that, like, oh, this is the story of a love drama, this is the story of this or that, it's very serious, the MST3K mantra becomes more inappropriate. Because it's no longer really the most fun way to enjoy the story. When you're trying to be really serious, and you're trying to pull the audience in and make them believe a thing is real, ideally, they're having the most fun and they're most immersed when they believe what you're saying. And when they're not sitting there thinking about, like, well, like, if you tell them, like, I battled the tornado with my teeth, and you really want them to believe you honestly battled the tornado with your teeth, you're not really benefiting from them sitting there thinking about how fake that totally is. Like, you don't want them to see the strings attached on your deal. If that were true, then, nobody would ever go through the trouble to, like, hire 3D artists or anything like that. They would just have like, oh yeah, no, we're out in the ocean. Like, they would just do everything like a stage performance. They wouldn't even bother to try and hide any of the details. They'd just be like, whatever. Like, MST3K mantra, don't ask any questions, get over it. And again, that worked for MST3K because they were not like a high-budget movie kind of thing. They were making fun of B-movies. That was kind of their whole shtick. Charming and fun, but more like the tall tale kind of thing than it is like a really serious storytelling element. And anyway, like I say, what got me thinking about this was an argument about the Legend of Korra, which, like, I was on the internet and I was talking with this guy, and with a group of people, really, but I started talking about, like, the Platinum Robot thing, and about how it really bothered me, because the way that the show worked is they explain this premise. They have, like, earthbenders, airbenders, whatever. These people with the magical ability to manipulate the elements based on what type of element it is. But the show, because it's magic, it doesn't really establish very concrete rules for how the element bending works. They say, like, oh yes, I can bend earth. But you can't just bend any solid object. Like, solid water is not earth, because water is water, you see. But the water benders can bend solid ice, and as someone who had like a background in chemistry and you know, the natural sciences, this like bothered me a little bit. But that's one of those cases where you have to apply the MST3K mantra, and you say like, okay, but there's no real world analog for this. So if the show says that we can magically bend ice with our water bending powers, then I guess that when we say water bending, we mean like water, but also ice and steam and, you know, whatever, like the various states of water. And occasionally they could bend other liquids, like they could bend blood, which I guess you could justify by saying like there's water in blood. So, you know, I don't know. Like the rules were a little weird, and they weren't always super clear. Like they had firebenders and they could bend fire, but they could also bend lightning. You know, and like I guess lightning is like a fire, kind of. So sometimes, you know, like if you really got into like what is lightning, what is fire, what is this, what is that, it didn't make a whole lot of logical sense, but because it was magic, you kind of had to let it pass. But at one point in the original show, they had a character who could bend earth, and she gets trapped in this iron box. And so she's like, oh no, I'm trapped in this iron box. Like, earthbenders can't bend earth metals. That just doesn't work. And so she's kind of like looking in this box, but she's blind, and she sees the world by feeling out, like, the earth, essentially. She sees it like a bat. She has echolocation with her feet. And so she's trying to figure out how to get out of this box, and she's able to see the earth impurities in the iron. And this actually makes perfect sense. This was good writing. This was very clever. But there's the way that metallurgy works, the way that iron works, is that atoms form a sort of a crystalline structure when they create a structure, and they're circular. Their atoms are kind of circular in nature, so they can't pack in perfectly. What they do is they bunch in as well as they can, but there's going to be little holes between each of the round atoms. And things are capable of getting into those holes. They're called interstitial spaces. And small atoms especially will get into those. And carbon happens to be a very small atom, so what you find is that carbon will actually get into iron and become a part of its structure. And in fact, that's how you get steel. Steel is just an alloy of like iron and carbon. And these atoms being in the interstitial spaces actually prevents the crystal lattice from moving around as much, and that's why steel is harder than iron. So, you know, they looked at this and they said, like, okay, so there's carbon in steel, and we've established that earthbenders can throw carbon around. Like, they had a whole episode where they attacked someone with coal. So we can move carbon. Carbon is earth. And they got a little clever, you know, like, and this is one of these things where, like, the show kind of, like, gets my chemistry hackles up a little bit, because they're clever with this whole metallurgy thing. And, you know, I have to be like, okay, that works, that's fine. But then it's kind of like, they just have to tell you what the rules are. Like, you know, metal benders can bend carbon in an alloy, you know, but they can't bend, like, ferrous metal. They can't bend ferrous iron, just because. So, yeah, so anyway, so Toph, this earthbender, this blind earthbender, she learns how to bend iron by bending, I guess, the carbon impurities in iron. And so from that point on, she's able to metal bend. But she's not actually metal bending, it's a trick. She's bending the carbon within the metal. So fast forward all the way to Legend of Korra, where I believe some of the original writers have left. They've still got the directors of the show are there. But Legend of Korra starts to get really weird. Like they jump forward in tech levels a lot, and then eventually they just go completely off the rails. But at one point, they established this trillionaire businessman who is a bad guy for some reason. I can't even remember. Like, the show was about this level of writing where, like, looking back, I can't even recall why this guy was evil. But he had trillions of dollars, and he decided he wanted to build a robot army to kill benders, or to destroy the governments, or to eat all the cabbages or something like that, because they always pick on the cabbage guy. And anyway, so they build all these platinum robots. Well, I'll get to this. He builds a bunch of robots out of platinum, and each of these robots are like a story tall. And what he explains, he goes, it's kind of like this weird, like, Dr. Robotnik logic, because he gets up there and he's like, so, like, oh, looks like the Avatar has come to wreck up my plans. Well, it turns out that I planned ahead, and I knew that benders would want to stop me from doing my evil, so I built an entire robot army out of platinum. Why platinum, you ask? Like, I see the dumbfounded expression on your faces. Why one of the most expensive metals in the world? Well, the reason it is because platinum is unbendable, because it's so pure. It's so pure. And again, if you go back and you think about like carbon being in the interstitial spaces of iron, and that being the reason why you could bend the metal, it doesn't actually make sense to say that platinum is pure. Because platinum is actually a very large, bulky atom. It's got a very high density, it's really big, and so it has very large interstitial spaces, and it's actually not very pure at all. It's not a very reactive metal, which is to say, like, it doesn't oxidize like iron will, but it does form tons of alloys. In fact, it forms alloys with carbon like no problem. So it was really weird that he said this, because knowing a little bit about metallurgy, this statement that platinum is pure didn't make any sense to me. Like, there should totally be carbon imperfections in platinum. You should totally be able to metal bend platinum. And aside from that, like, I was looking it up, and I thought, like, I was looking up all the properties of platinum, and kind of like, I was in the car, and I was joking with Claudia about platinum and things like that, building out of platinum. And one of the things that I found out is that platinum is, like, really actually not very much tougher than high-grade cast iron. So it's, like, weaker than steel. So it's not bad. I mean, like, it's got a, like, its actual bendability is somewhere on the level of, like I say, high-grade cast iron, which is not awful, except for the fact that you have to realize that platinum is, like, stupid heavy. And I was doing the math, and, like, these robots were all about a story tall, right? So I generously assume that maybe they had a meter cubed platinum in terms of volume. And so if you look at how much that costs, that's like 20,000 kilograms of platinum. So each of these robots weighed like 4 tons or something, like, or 40 tons or something like that. 40 tons of platinum, 40,000 pounds to 20,000 kilograms, sort of rough calculations here. 20,000 kilograms in any case, though, like 20,000 kilograms per robot. And then I was looking up, like, the average price of platinum, like, per robot, and it turns out that each of these robots, if you assume only like a cubic meter of platinum, each of these robots would have cost $660 million by today's prices. So then I looked up, like, the F-35 program to see how much each individual plane cost on average when you factor in all the R&D costs and everything else. And each airplane, each F-35 fighter craft, when you factor in all the costs, not just the cost per, like, building plane, like actually building the planes is about 80 million to 100 million. Each plane costs that much individually. But if you factor in all the R&D costs and everything else, that, like, triples to 330 million. So essentially, for every one platinum robot this guy built, he could have built 2 F-35 fighter jets. Like, that's how bad it was. The F-35 fighter is, like, the single most expensive weapons program in the history of mankind to date. Like, we have never spent more money on a weapons project. And this guy was already blowing that away by twice its amount, by twice its costs in raw materials alone, because his robots were built out of platinum. And that's not even factoring in, like, his research and development costs. Like, you just have to imagine. So he was going to build, like, I don't know, 100 of these platinum robots, and it was going to be, like, $6 billion. I don't know, it was just some unfathomable, like, cost going into building these platinum robots. And then he sends them out to attack the city. And it's funny, but because they're still, like, 20,000 kilogram robots, when the earthbenders get to them, like, they're not even metal benders, they're just earthbenders, and what they do is they just, like, bend a ditch underneath the robots, and the robots fall in. And that's it. They're so worthless. Like, the robots are just the dumbest thing, like, the single most expensive, like, doubling the F-35 program, and then just completely ineffectual. Like, they weren't even really effective against other kinds of bending either. Like, they were not, the only thing that he was doing is he was trying to prevent them from being bent by metal benders, which was, like, a highly specialized form of earthbending that you had to train in. And I think, like, only the police could do it. So, yes, totally worthless, totally stupid, totally dumb. And then later on, they go on to build this, like, 40-story tall robot out of the stuff. And they also build, like, more mobile suits of platinum. Like, it's weird, like, they just won't drop this, they just don't let go of it. And so I was having this argument with this guy about, like, whether or not you could build platinum, and it rapidly became obvious that the guy didn't know anything about platinum as I was having this discussion with him. I don't know how old they were or whatever, but for one thing, like, they didn't realize how heavy platinum was. Because they were like, well, you know, like I know platinum's super rare and super expensive, but, like, maybe it's more abundant in the Avatar universe. And I was like, well, I mean, it's still, like... It's still super, super heavy, and I told him like how heavy it was, and he didn't really have a rebuttal for that. He was just like, "Holy cow!" And I was like, "Yeah, it's actually a really dumb building material. Like, you should never build anything out of platinum. I mean, nothing serious. It would be so heavy, like it would just collapse under its own weight." And he was like, "Well, okay, well, discounting that." Discounting that, he had to just like let that one go, but he's like, discounting that, like maybe it's still super abundant, so it wouldn't cost like $660 million. And I was like, well, in that case, like a lot of platinum deposits come from like tin and copper mines and stuff like that. Like you find platinum in copper and tin ore, and so that means that like if you have a lot of platinum, you have even more copper and tin. And if you combine those two together, you actually get brass, and you can get like hard brass. I mean, it's a type of bronze, right? So that means that like you could do bronze smelting. And you know what's weird about bronze is that it's a small molecule, and like copper doesn't form a alloy with carbon. So that would actually be a legitimately pure metal with no earth imperfections in it. Like that, like if they'd been building these robots out of bronze, it would be astronomically cheaper. It would actually be pure from like a metallurgy standpoint. and it's not it's a thing, like people actually build stuff out of bronze. I mean, like bronze working is ancient technology. You could totally get away with bronze. And he was like, well, okay, well maybe like platinum just exists, naturally in its own world. And I was like, well, if that were the case, like, if you just like find platinum buried in huge amounts, I mean, it's been underground, it's had plenty of time to absorb a lot of carbon. And he's like, well, maybe they go through like a purifying process to do all this stuff. And like he just kind of kept backing up until eventually he got all the way to like, well, look, it's a fictional universe. Maybe everything works perfectly in this fictional universe. The platinum is light, the platinum is abundant, it's not expensive, it doesn't appear where you actually find platinum. It doesn't have any of the properties of platinum. To which I replied, well, why didn't they just call it stupidium? Like, why did they call it platinum? Why would the writers call something platinum if it had none of the qualities of platinum? And at the end of the day, when I talk about backing into the fourth wall, I think that this is where you get with the MST3K mantra, is that if you're lying blatantly and everyone has fun with the lie and they know it's all a lie, it's okay. But if you're trying to tell a convincing story and you want the audience to go with you, then, water has to be wet, fire has to be hot, the sky is blue, the grass is green, platinum is platinum. You can't tell the audience that just like, yes, I'm building a robot out of platinum, and then when they question you, you can't then back up and be like, well, it has none of the qualities of platinum. Like, that's just stupid. That's just bad writing. It's terrible. It takes you out of the immersion. And I guess you could still have fun by just assuming that the whole thing is like a great big lie and all that. But at that point, it feels like they're trying to, like, they think you're stupid. I mean, maybe like that's, you have to just like set that aside and not let yourself feel insulted. But many people, I think they kind of get it in their heads that when you tell them a lie and then you act like you think that they'll believe it. Like if you tell them like platinum is a great building material and you're going to believe this, like you're dumb enough, you think that it'll happen. You're kind of insulting the intelligence of your audience because they're all like, we know that platinum doesn't work like that. That's not how it is. So you've got to call it stupidium. You've got to make it magic metal, magic metal. And then that way everyone's going to believe it, because magic metal doesn't exist. There's no real-world analog, so if you just tell them, I built this robot out of stupidium, magical stupidium that I harvested from the spirit world. It's very expensive. You could even go on and say, like, if you wanted this guy to be a rich trillionaire, and you'd be like, oh, no one else can build robots out of stupidium, because stupidium is very expensive. That's how you do it. You just be like, it's really hard to harvest stupidium. I had to spend a lot of time in the spirit mines harvesting stupidium. So, you apply magic logic to make the magic kind of balance out. And this is how you do it. It's the only way that you could do it. As soon as you say platinum, anyone who knows anything about platinum has a lot of questions, and they're not fooled. And the only way that they can get through it is to just be like, yeah, I'll just pretend I'm an idiot. I'll pretend I don't know what you're talking about. Like, you stupid guy. It's like playing a con man where you're like, oh yes, I'm a doctor. And then like if you, like imagine a doctor show. Like imagine if they did Scrubs, right? Like Scrubs was a comedy, and so even they could get along with this better. But imagine if like Scrubs didn't know anything about medicine, and they were just like, yes, I'm going to saw this man's leg off with like a plastic mallet, something like that, with a spoon. I'm going to just gouge he's got eye disease, I'm going to gouge his eyes out with a spoon now. And they were just like making up the medicine as they went along. Like, real doctors would just, throw their hands up. Like, real doctors are a smaller demographic, so I guess you could get away with this. But then imagine if they tried to turn around and like do some of the more serious plot lines where like people are dying from cancer and whatnot. And they're like, oh, I'm so sad about so-and-so dying from cancer. His liver, he pooped out his liver, like, during the procedure. And like, they would just say, like, these things that just don't happen. And everyone who's familiar with cancer would just be like, that doesn't work like that. And this isn't sad, and it's not impactful. This is just upsetting. This whole episode is just upsetting. So not being able to tell your lies properly, it can really rob you of emotional impact. Like when you talk about your tall tales and you get into like, I battled the twister with my teeth. People don't get upset about that because it's so crazy and so over the top. Like, it's just nutty. And again, like, the fun thing is seeing like, what's the next nutty thing you're going to do? And in fact, a lot of shows that rely on that kind of nuttiness work like that. Aqua Teen Hunger Force springs to mind as something. Like, they would just constantly come up with some new nutty monster and some new nutty rule, like some little thing was doing this. And the fun of that show was seeing like, what kind of insane premise were they going to run with next? And like, they would just say something and it would just be true. They didn't really have any logic. It was just kind of like, like, we're just going to keep going with these lies. Like, everything is a lie, but it's all a really amusing lie. They never really slowed down to be like, let's have a serious episode about cancer. That would have been disaster. So, yes. But anyway, though, I brought up My Little Pony, and there's really not like like this was earlier when I was just talking about My Little Pony. And in the case of the guy who was like MST3K mantra on My Little Pony, in fairness to him, the MLP show has gotten really weird for a lot of reasons, and there's a lot of problems with their writing. Specifically the issue of like Platinum not being Platinum, they're not so guilty of, but they've been doing it a little bit here in season 7. One example is they had an engineer, like Fluttershy hires an engineer to build a hospital. And allow me to explain how engineering actually works. What you do is you first hire a group of land surveyors to go and they check out the area. They tell you how the ground is sloped. They tell you, this is here, this is there, here's your power lines, here's whatever. They might go out there with a metal detector. They don't necessarily look for power lines. You might hire someone else to do that, like the Power and Lycum. But in any case, though, your land surveyors will tell you where things are and what things do. Here's your property pins, You just map out the area for them so they know, they have a preliminary idea of what they're looking at. After that, you have somebody do a geological survey as they go out there and they check the soil and they tell you, like, here's the soil composition. It's going to shift this much, under this amount of weight. Like, here's kind of its yield strength. You want to build to make sure that your foundations don't shift. And so after that, then you have your engineer sit down and he builds out his blueprints based on the data gathered ahead of the project. So he does all his theoretical blueprints. Then you have a field engineer go out and he looks at the site and he compares the blueprints to the site. And if he finds mistakes, like he sees, like, obviously you can't build a foundation here because there's this in the way and you would have to dig that up and that'd be expensive and so on and so forth. The field engineer makes corrections to the theoretical blueprints, and then you have your field blueprints, and then you actually start construction. So it's a whole process. Engineering is a big thing. And in this show where Fluttershy hires an engineer, she's like, I would like you to do a landscaping project, right? Like a very simple project. She just wants him to like dig a little pond, and then I don't know, like nail some. He just wants her to she wants him to like drive some stakes into the ground. It's like some wooden stakes and like some wooden pillars. And then I think she was gonna like put some bird feeders on the pillars or something like that. It was some really, really simple project that virtually wouldn't require any of the engineering process. Like, I was actually talking to Claudia. I was like, who would you hire for that? Like, and she was like, well, I don't know. Like, I'm not sure you'd really need an engineer, but there's like a lot of engineering fields that would have the education to be able to do that kind of job. Like, she's like, I don't know who you'd contract with. I mean, probably a landscaping company. Like, you wouldn't hire an engineering firm for a project like that. And I was like, oh, okay, all right, that makes sense. But they hired an engineer, and so he looks at this landscaping project, and he goes, gee, I don't know. I have blueprints for a hospital. You want me to just like build a hospital instead? And when I told Claudia this, she just like cracked up laughing. She's like, oh my God. Like, so in the show, they proposed this really simple project, and the engineer was like, what if I build a hospital instead? And it was kind of like a world's dumbest engineer joke to her, because you imagine like suppose you took the world's dumbest engineer and you gave him any sort of project at all, and instead he proposed doing like the exact, like not even the exact opposite of your plans, but just he proposed a plan that was like multiple times more expensive, would take way longer, and wasn't the thing you wanted. Like, it was just like the worst. Like, this is like the kind of thing, like, this is the engineer who loses his license on day one. You know, like, it was just like everything about this was wrong. It was just like really funny. He's like, well, I have blueprints for a pre-existing project. Maybe I'll just relocate them out here. It's like, that's not how building buildings works. That's not how any of this works. None of this works like this. So My Little Pony, like I say, it's kind of like it's a kid's show, and you know there's magic and stuff like that, but they get into these real world analogs, and they can't use the magic excuse anymore because they hired an expert and he uses blueprints, right? He's an engineer, and so when you look at him and you say like, what do engineers actually do? Well, this pony in the show doesn't behave like an engineer. He doesn't do any real engineering, so it's kind of weird. Like, pony engineers are not engineers. And again, being a kid's show, they get away with this a little bit because, like, animals are not really animals. They're, like, sentient. They can understand English. They can react to you and so on and so forth. So maybe pony engineers maybe they just, like, relocate. Maybe they don't have to build foundations. Like, maybe the slope of the ground doesn't matter. Maybe they don't care. I don't know. But it's stupid, and it's kind of like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And the episode kind of sucked anyway, so it's hard to forgive. But then they did another episode where they had, like, this dog. And the dog didn't want to play ball. And then later on, like, Sweetie Belle explained, she's like, oh, I know what the problem is. Your dog is like 2 or 3 years older than it was the last time you played ball with it. And he doesn't play ball anymore. Yeah, dogs just grow out of ball. You know, sometimes they just, you know, they get too old for ball. You know, like, you have to play a different game with them. And it turned out that this dog, like, wanted to play stick. Like, he wanted to catch the stick. He didn't want to catch the ball anymore. He wanted to play stick. And, you know, I don't know. I just don't, like... the only dog I've ever met that didn't like ball at any age was a dog that had health problems and was like morbidly obese. like if your dog doesn't want to play ball, your dog has terrible health problems. I don't know what to say. So it's kind of funny. Again, it's like the show's just sort of like, oh no, your dog is not a dog. Like, your dog is actually your dog is a My Little Pony dog. And again, I don't understand why they would do that. Like, why would you have a dog and then not write it as a dog? Like, it's a magical world. Why not give this girl, like, oh, you're mystical, like, half iguana, half dog? Yeah, half iguana. Iguana dogs grow out of fetch. Iguana dogs grow out of fetch, and then they sprout wings and become butterflies. Because why the heck not? Like, it's a magical world. It's a magical world. Just have any magical pet. It didn't have to be a dog. If you didn't want to write a dog, then don't make it a dog. I don't know. Like, this is the thing. That's where the MST3K mantra actually works. Is when you just pick up a fictional creature and you're like, yeah, half dog, half iguana means it doesn't play fetch for all of its life. MST3K mantra. I should really just relax. Okay, fine. The half dog, half iguana doesn't play fetch for its entire life. All right, it's your universe. I don't care. But when you tell me that, like, dogs just naturally grow out of fetch, I have to kind of, like, raise my hand and be like, excuse me, what dogs do you know? because that's not how dogs work. You know, how am I supposed to just turn my brain off and just be like, yeah, that's not how dogs work. Okay, yeah. I don't know. So anyway, backing up to the fourth wall. It's actually a bad concept, and I see people do it on the internet all the time. Like, they get really attached to a show, they really want to defend a show, they really want to believe it's a great show. So you present to them this obvious logical fallacy, like the platinum robot thing, and you're just like, explain the platinum robots. And they'll try. Like, they really will try. But eventually, almost invariably, I watch them back up until their back hits the fourth wall, and then they say, wait, it's a fictional universe, which is essentially like saying, wait, it's a TV show. Fourth wall. Your back's on the fourth wall. You know, the immersion is ruined. You're essentially just admitting that the entire thing is a lie. You know, which sometimes is okay, but a lot of times was not the objective. But anyway, though, that's just kind of a fun, musing, what else can I say? Thanks for joining me, everybody. I will catch you all next time.